I'm back. As you all know, I got suspended from social media for a month just prior to the election. Whoa, what a coincidence. And when the election was over, I kind of lost steam on this whole thing. Got to visit the children for Thanksgiving and my parents. So that was a great joy. I focused on that. Got back down here. We weren't able to see the kids for Christmas, so I wanted to make sure I spent as much time doing as much activities with my wife as possible. You see, as I've explained time and time again in these videos, if you don't get involved and you don't defend what we have, you won't always have it and you're taking it for granted. But the flip side, and I want to be conscious of this, if you're always fighting the good fight and you just miss out on all these opportunities, then it doesn't matter if you lose or not because you basically thrown it away. So that's done. It's almost 2020 and I'm back. I read the documents. I listened to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who filed them, give his explanation, and frankly, I was legally dubious. And I also listened to Senator Ted Cruz, whom I respect immensely, give his explanation of the case. Just so you know, Ted Cruz was the one who was asked to argue it before the Supreme Court if they did hear it. And it was kind of obvious that he was pretty skeptical himself whether or not this would be successful in the Supreme Court. So, as much as I like to pound on Judge Roberts, and I understand everyone's frustration, realistically, the Supreme Court made the right legal decision. So what do I mean by that? Now, the reason I know that Texas really didn't believe they would be successful is because in their brief, they actually cite McPherson versus Blacker all the way from 1892. Which is really ironic because that case militates against the case they were trying to make. So, what am I saying? It all comes down to standing and the Electoral College. So, I'll explain standing first. Standing is all about who is the aggrieved party. Are you the person who was actually wrong, or are you the party who was actually wrong who can bring the case? It addresses the who, not the what. How do they address the what? It is very clear that Pennsylvania violated its own constitution. You can look it up yourself. Article 7, Section 14 of the PA Constitution is very clear that people are mandated to vote in person other than very limited, very special exceptions. And there you have to apply for an exemption, and then you get that absentee voting. Just mass mail-in voting was unconstitutional. The problem is the aggrieved party is you. You Pennsylvania citizens, you are the aggrieved party because your rights were violated, your constitution was violated. Texas has no standing. Their rights weren't violated. And why weren't they violated? Well, it comes down to the Electoral College. According to the Constitution, again, we all agreed to send our different electors to Congress and to name who we want for president. And you could say the case, United States versus Nuno. The Supreme Court decided it's Nuno business who each state sends. It's just you get to pick yours, they get to pick theirs, and it doesn't matter how they pick them. So that's the whole deal. Now, the ironic thing is the left hates the Electoral College when it's inconvenient. This week they probably like it, and next week they'll go back to hating it. Now, since we're people of principle and since we defend the Constitution, we believe it's a good thing when it works in our favor. We think it's a good thing in cases like this where it works against us, but it's a good thing and we're here to defend the Constitution. Now, I said Texas didn't really believe they would win this case. So what exactly was it? Was it just a waste of time? I think it kind of was that Hail Mary pass, like cross your fingers, hoping it could work kind of thing. But what was it really? What will the history books look back and say this possibly was? Like, what was the precipitating event about what's possibly going to happen in the future? Well, first off, you got to know it wasn't just Texas. Look at these orange states. Joining Texas, there's 17 additional states: Missouri, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, and West Virginia. All filed a joint brief I don't have Florida listed in there. I don't think I said it, but it's obviously in orange, so I'm sure they jumped out. I did say it. They'll join this joint brief with Texas. And you look at it, it's very regional. It's very convenient. They're all kind of aligned. It's all middle America against the coastal elites. Coast is blue, they're opposed. The middle, it's all red and orange. I don't believe they were setting out a legal case to overturn the election. I think history will say what they were laying out is a moral case for secession. Why do I say that? I'm going to read from the actual legal brief. And if you're historically astute, these words should sound very, very familiar to you. What they wrote is that our constitutional republic has endured for nearly 2.5 centuries based on the consent of the governed. That consent is grounded in the confidence of our people in the legitimacy of our institutions of government. Among our most fundamental institutions is a system of free and fair elections that we rely upon, and any erosion in that foundation jeopardizes stability of our republic. Now here's where it gets even heavier. Fortunately, the framers of our Constitution provided for this moment. It is now the duty of this honorable court to objectively review the facts presented by the plaintiff in this historic case, render judgment upon the unconstitutional actions in the defendant states, and restore the confidence of all Americans that the rule of law will be upheld today and our elections in the future will be secured. That's really the first volley in a civil war. They're basically giving, well, instead of telling you what they're giving, if that didn't sound familiar to you, I'm going to read from another document that is, I won't say identical, but extremely reminiscent. I hope you recognize this one. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have been connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to that separation. Now you got to remember, we won the war, so we call it the War of Independence or the Revolutionary War. Had we lost, it would have a name like the Colonial Civil War, the Civil War of the Americas, because that's what it was. We were rebelling and having a revolution against our legitimate government at the time because we decided it has lost its legitimacy. And it was for a hell of a lot less than mucking up an election. So, I continue. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, it was assumed that England shared the same values as the Americans, but they were just falling short. Now, imagine if your enemy or the other party cannot even agree on these foundational, self-evident moral principles. You have even less in common. So I would argue that the American right and the American left has less in common than the American colonies did with the English. It says that all men are created equal. So that's a self-evident point. It's still clear to everyone on the right that all men are created equal. Now to the Marxist left, their whole premise that surrounds all of their woke intersectionality and all this nonsense they do is that there's an inherent inequality in America and that they're the ones who need to seize control of government in every aspect of our lives so they can rectify that inequity with systematic equality. Now, we'll go further. That they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Now, the notoriously materialistic, atheistic left believe that rights are expendable in their pursuit of that Marxist version of equality, which they now call social justice. That among these are life, Do I even have to go there? Because we know what the abortion happy left thinks about life. Not a whole lot of respect there. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness. 2020 brought us COVID and has made it abundantly clear that there are two diametrically opposed philosophies as far as what it means, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the worldview of the right thinks that we are all adults and we all have the right and the responsibility to eke out our own living, to go out and work, to provide for our family, and to give our lives meaning through labor. Now, on the left, they want to be a nanny state and are perfectly comfortable arbitrarily destroying the economy and destroying people's lives because they think it's in the best interest of you, and they can best decide your happiness and your safety. Now, because this is on YouTube, I cannot say that there is a ton of evidence that has come in with all sorts of chicanery and tomfoolery in regards to this election. So I won't say that. I won't say it's a shame that you probably don't know that because of the media you listen to has silenced and censored it. And I'm not going to say it because this is on YouTube, and if I were to say it, already been threatened by YouTube that I will be censored yet again, cut off, eliminated, and maybe my account deleted. What I can say is that there is definitely widespread suspicion that there was voter fraud. So I'm not presenting the evidence for it because that's actually the problem if you present the evidence. I'm just doing a sociological analysis that half the country believes there was widespread voter fraud. And we also know that the same media that is not reporting any of that told us, point of fact, that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, and now reveal that he's been under investigation since 2018. We also know that that same media told us that it would be an absolute miracle if a vaccine was ready in 2020 and that Trump was just lying to the public. But surprise, surprise, that also is now available in November. And all I have to say is psychologically, censorship does nothing to quell suspicions. If anything, it justifiably foments them to a much greater degree. So back to our declaration, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. What cracks me up is that for the last 4 years, the press has got it completely wrong. Did they get it wrong because they're stupid? No. They got it wrong because they have absolutely no interest in actually understanding those who they disagree with. They're not interested in truth, and their only desire is to make their opposition out to sound like Nazis. So for 4 years, we've heard this terrible danger of growing nationalism. If it was nationalism, it wouldn't be a threat to the left. What we've seen over the last several years, especially under Trump and started before Trump, is not a rise in nationalism. We've seen a rise in patriotism. They're related, but they're also quite different. See, nationalism is about blood and soil. It's people loving their country simply because it happens to be their country, and they would never take arms up against it. So lefties, you'd be perfectly fine if nationalism was the deal. Now, patriots are a whole different matter. See, patriots love America because of the ideas that founded it. the ones we just talked about in the Declaration, and the things enumerated in the Bill of Rights, and the government established in the Constitution. We will take up arms to defend those ideas and those principles. And we'll take up arms to defend those principles and ideas even against our national government. So, again, what do you think the founders were doing? They were fighting against their government for those principles. So those descendants of them, those who share their spirit, are the people on the right. The Democrat Socialists, on the other hand, they don't see the individual as sovereign. They don't see these principles as sovereign. They don't even see God as sovereign. They rely and follow the state. All that nonsense about the flag. Patriots don't fight for our flag because we're worried about a cloth or we're worried about colors. We fight for what it represents. And if it ceases to represent those ideals of life, liberty, and individual rights and responsibility to control our own destiny, patriots will fight against those colors. Now, I took an oath several times in both the military and as a police officer not to defend arbitrary edicts from a governor. Not at all. Not to defend land. No. I took an oath to defend our Constitution. Against whom? Here's the important part. All enemies. Foreign and domestic. And of all the enemies I've seen in my life, Islam is a threat. But not nearly the threat that Marxism, progressivism, liberalism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, leftism is the single greatest threat to the Constitution and to our American way of life. Now, it's very important to you police officers out there. Some of you still watch this. Patriots, by and large, have been backing you big time. Back the blue. We're all behind you. But with the COVID shutdowns and all these different things that are going, if you cease to uphold that oath that you took to defend the Constitution, then the patriots will cease to back you. Now, I know my fellow Yankees think this whole concept that Texas could secede is absolutely preposterous, but that's because you guys do not know the culture and the history of Texas. I was first introduced to it in the Marine Corps when I was at infantry school, and was a black older gentleman, was one of the instructors, and he introduced himself as, first of all, I just want to make one thing straight. I'm not an American. I'm a Texan. So that was kind of shock, stuck in my head. And years later, when not years later, sorry, it'd be a couple months later, I went to San Antonio for military police training, and it was a different world. I'd never seen so many state flags anywhere in my life. I think I probably saw more Texas flags than I did American flags. Texas was originally a republic. It's a Republic of Texas. It was its own nation. It was a sovereign nation for 9 years, from 1836 until it negotiated its annexation into the United States in 1845. That said, by 1861, they already seceded again. In fact, it was the case Texas versus White in the United States Supreme Court in 1869, where they arbitrarily basically decided that you have no right to secede as from the United States. Court ruled that it was illegal, and they wrote the Constitution and all its provisions looks to an indestructible union composed of indestructible states. Now here's the important part, and this is what I'm getting at. The court did allow the possibility of divisibility. There are two. One was through consent of the states, and the other was through revolution. Now that consent, that irreconcilable differences, divorce from the country, might even be a possibility, because I think the coastal elites, got the blue over here and the blue over here, hate the middle of the country just as much as the middle of the country hates them. We're definitely different people. We're probably as different today as we were before the last Civil War. You could see the orange and the red, it's almost like a country within itself. It looks like it almost would be like three countries. There's access to waterways, which a country would need. So is it possible? It's possible they could just go their own way. Realistically, no, though, because even though we have red states and blue states, the reality is most states are a pretty half and half, 50-50 mix. And if we had a civil war, it wouldn't be a war between the states. It would be the most horrible concept we can't even imagine of actual civil war. Now, if this stuff still sounds hokey to you, let's listen to Ulysses S. Grant, who basically won the war against the last time half of it seceded. His remarks about the right of a people to secede is now the right of revolution is an inherent one. When people are oppressed by their government, it is a natural right that they enjoy to relieve themselves of the oppression. If they are strong enough, either by withdrawal from it or by overthrowing it and substituting a government more acceptable. But any people or part of a people who resort to this remedy stake their lives, their property, and every claim for protection given by citizenship on the issue. Victory, or the conditions imposed by their conqueror, must be the result. So again, this is a serious, serious issue, and we all better know what could happen and the consequences. Is it even feasible for Texas? Well, Texas has and I'm just talking Texas alone, I'm talking if the other 17 or 18 states join them. Texas alone has a $1.6 trillion economy. And if it became its own country, would be in the top 10 strongest economies in the world. They'd be ahead of South Korea. They'd be ahead of Canada. And they'd be roughly about the same size economically as Russia. Big bad Russia that the left is so afraid of allegedly now. Now that they're no longer communists, now they don't like them. Now Texas's population at a little over 28 million versus Russians Federation of 144, 145 million means that Texas GDP per capita is actually 5 times that of Russia. So is that what I want? Absolutely not. In fact, this video is out there so that we can hopefully avoid it. So the best thing we could have is reunification. Second best would be that clean break, that consent on all parties they were talking about. The third would be a war, which is not desirable, but if it was a war like the last one, where it was a war between the states, different uniforms, different size, clear battle lines, that would be at least more desirable than what is probably the most likely and the most horrible we can imagine, a civil war. And that would be a civil war as what you see predicted, Mark 13:12 says, and brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and the children will rise against parents and have them put to death. So that's a civil war where you don't know what side your neighbor's on and everyone's out to get you. And if you don't think they would do that, look how people were ratting each other out with the COVID thing. But how will we know who's on what side if it's like that? Well, it's fairly easy. We know all the people on the left will be the ones wearing the virtue signaling cloth masks that aren't even medical grade and don't work. So that's how we know who's on the left. And the right would be all the guys with the rifles. Now, I don't want this, and I'm kind of kidding, but I'm telling you guys on the left, you're basically facing the ones on the right would be all the ones with the military training, police training, all the weapons, and basically all the testosterone. On the left, all you have to muster up in your defense would be self-righteousness, indignation, arrogance, and a corrupt press, which in the past has never really done a whole lot to win a war. Am I saying this to bust your stones? No, I'm saying this so that you know that you have as much vested in keeping this from happening, this divide, while you're partying and all happy, to realize that this could actually be the celebration that leads to your doom. So you need to get on board on the plan and what we need to do to reunify and become one nation under God again. First thing we have an election in Georgia. and it's kind of late because I think it's in January 5th or 6th. I don't know if you can still send money in because guess what? Once again, social media has banned all political ads running up to this election. So donating money, I don't know if that helps. It's kind of disgusting that social media actually thinks has successfully banned political ads right now. But if the Democrats win, they'll have control of not only the executive branch, but the legislative branch as well. And if that happens, we will see them emboldened and radicalized to an extent that has never been seen before in America. And for the right, you'll have a sense of absolute hopelessness, which is very dangerous for the left, and a feeling that our only recourse is revolution, because the left has proven none of the constitutional values that we hold so dear mean anything to them, and none of them are inviolable, and none of them are sacrosanct. So it's very crucial that the Republicans win this election in Georgia. It's also good for you guys politically on the left because if Democrats don't take control of the legislature and destroy the country, the economy is going to bounce back naturally and Joe Biden get all the credit. So you want to look good, basically let Republicans control the Congress and Biden will look a lot better. Now, the second one is more important. It's something you can do personally. We need to be unified, but not unified with the left's definition of unity, which means obedience and acquiescence to their leftist policies and going along with everything. The right doesn't expect you to go along to be unified. We're very happy to agree to disagree. We believe in just respecting everyone's right to make their own personal decisions for themselves. You see, for the right, we believe that ideas can be won through conversation, and the ideological battle should be won through logic and reasoning, and that victory should be displayed at the ballot box. But when you take away our right to speak and you make us feel that the ballot box is no longer valid, you leave us with no other recourse. Now, growing up my entire life, the liberal ideal was always encapsulated in a phrase that is attributed to Voltaire, but it's via Evelyn Beatrice Hall, which is, I might not agree with a word that you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. You don't see that anymore because we don't have liberals anymore. We only have leftists. And I see you all applaud when Facebook and Twitter and all that nonsense censors people. And they censor dangerous speech. Well, if you believe in free speech but not dangerous speech, you don't believe in free speech. And you don't believe in science because science requires a skeptical attitude towards everything. You always want to doubt and investigate and question. And that's how we come to new enlightenment and new discoveries, is constantly questioning the prevailing mindset and constantly questioning the experts. So what you need to do is speak out against censorship. Take a hard stand. If there's Nazis that want to speak out, you got to defend them. If there's any disgusting party, if you have to defend everyone's right to free speech, especially people that have been reasonable your entire life, you've known your entire life, you know are decent people that are coming from a good place. You need to defend their right to speak and then be willing to listen. You've proven once you've taken power, like I said, we quoted this, the Voltaire thing, but Voltaire inspired the French Revolution, and they believed in freedom of speech when they were revolutionaries. And once they took control, once they took power, they stifled everyone's right to speech, and the terror came and they cut everyone's heads off. You've pretty much shown you have the same exact mentality as the Jacobins from France, because now that you control the media, academia, and social media, it's okay to chop off the heads of everyone. So what you need to do is be adamant and vocal that everyone should be able to speak freely without any fear of being fired, any fear of being arrested, obviously, being doxxed or any of that stuff. Because I've seen people I went to high school with doxing people they don't even know. The last thing, I'll do a whole other thing on just the First Amendment when I go through the Constitution, but this nonsense where people say, well, it's a private company. No. That's like saying, I don't believe in rape, but that's a private person doing a rape, so there's nothing we can do about it, or that's okay. Baloney. You believe in free speech or you don't believe in free speech. So I'll debunk that whole that's a private company argument in another video, but you either believe in it or you don't. And if you believe in defending everyone's rights, like I spent a career defending people's rights, whether I like them or not, we can be buddies even if we disagree on things. If you don't believe in people's fundamental rights and you don't believe in defending their rights, sorry, but we can't coexist. Now, because I mentioned before, I can't say anything about massive irregularities and fraud altering the outcome of the election. But what I can talk about is trust and how it's important in reconciliation. Now, when I talk to people and they act like there's no such thing as voter fraud, they can't possibly be an intelligent person who says there's no such thing as voter fraud. That would be equivalent to saying there's no such thing as speeding. People don't steal. People don't cheat on their taxes, and people don't stream entertainment illegally in their homes, and they don't cheat on their spouse. Like, give me a break. The question might be how common it is. I even saw one guy post an article supposed to be an intelligent little lefty, especially the ones that claim I'm really Republican. I just don't like Trump. And then they'll put these articles out that say this was like a month, 2 months before the election. The federal authorities have said there is no evidence of outside nation tampering with this election. And they would forward that as evidence that there's no such thing as voter fraud. Well, one, there's no evidence of something that didn't happen yet, of course. Duh. Two, no one's worried about foreign involvement. They're worried about our own people doing it, although, and I won't mention this, there's evidence of mass truckloads of ballots being shipped in from our overseas enemies, but I won't mention that because that would get me banned. I just say it's equivalent. Once one party says there's no such thing as voter fraud, I use this analogy. It's like you have one spouse who says, who's going to a convention, and he says, oh dear, no, there's no such thing as people don't cheat at these conventions. That doesn't happen. And the fact that you're accusing me that there could be, oh, I'm just so offended by that. How dare you say that adultery happens at these conventions? That guy's suspicious as can be, and we know he's a cheater because he's claiming it doesn't happen. We have the other guy, on the other hand, who has concern for his wife and wants to make sure they're reconciled. He says, you have very legitimate concerns, and I'm going to make sure that I alleviate you of those concerns by setting up parameters so that I can't possibly be accused of any infidelity. Kind of like they made fun of Mike Pence because he will not be in a closed room or an elevator with a woman. And everyone said how silly and stupid it is. This is before the Me Too movement. But no, it's very logical. I kind of do the same stuff with my wife. It's not a matter of whether I trust myself or not. It says I just don't put myself in situations where I could be accused of it. Same thing. If you care about this relationship, if you care about this democratic republic, if you care about this electoral process, you will want to do everything you possibly can to secure it and make sure no fraud is possible. You should care about the integrity of the election as much as we do. And the fact that you don't care about the integrity of the election, the fact that you don't care about people needing ID, the fact that you don't care about massive amounts of votes being just mailed in shows that you know exactly what it does to your favor. And that expedience and achieving goals is more important to you than foundational principles. And in that situation, we cannot get along. If you believe the election is legit, you should want to prove it. You should want to show how legitimate it is. You should want it as open and out to the light of day as absolutely possible. So again, I'm not calling for war. I'm begging that we avoid it. And you guys who are sitting on the sidelines, you're the cause of it. Not the radicals on the left or on the right. It's the ones who are just whistling past the graveyard, pretending none of this is happening. They're giving you steps you could do to get involved and to show that we're all Americans and believe in certain foundational principles. And I don't care if we have different ways of how making things better. That's good. The whole purpose of this is so we can generate discussion, we can have debate. But you have to believe in the core principles: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which means freedom, which means open up the frickin' economy and let people go out and work, and also the fact that we need to be able to speak. You see, the founding fathers gave us the First Amendment because they believed that reasonable people should be able to work out their differences through discussion. And they gave us the Second Amendment for when certain people take that away. God bless. Don't just be good. Go out and do good.